Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Greg, and this is Small Talk, where we discuss how faith fits in the big picture. And you've seen the title, Admit It, You're Lonely. Today, we're going to be addressing and combating isolation. You're in the right place. Today, I'm joined by Professor Marty Miller. How you doing, man?
Doing well, man.
Good deal, good deal. Now, I call you professor, but you've been teaching, you've been in education for quite a while.
Quite a while.
Well, you were.
Yeah.
Now your ministry is more men's discipleship, counseling,
You
leading.
know, it's still education.
This is very true.
Manhood education.
Manhood
This
education.
is where the deficit is at. We spend all these years, elementary, high school, college, teaching people how to do a job.
Right.
But we don't tell them how to
be a man.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it's really...
And that's exactly what we're talking about today. Isolation, loneliness. Now, this whole conversation started between you and I when I discovered about your ministry. What is it? Blueprintformen.com. That's correct?
.org.
.org. Thank you. Blueprintformen.org.
Yeah.
And you have an amazing promo video there. I'm going to link it in the description below. Definitely check it out, guys. I love this analogy you've used of the trees that stick together and the trees that's out in the field by itself. Isolation, manhood, mentorship. Walk me through how you got into that and how's that working?
Well, I think in everybody's journey, the deal is our own story bleeds into our ministry. I heard it say this way: the greater our misery, the greater our ministry. The greater the trial, the greater the testimony.
Man.
And so, not that I've had anything, like this horrendous life, like a lot of people might tell a story.
Right.
But everybody's pain is their own. And so my own pain was basically ties into this isolation thing.
Wow.
So as I look at my life and I look at other men, I see this commonality that isolation is a common theme, especially as men go from their young adulthood and into raising a family and the career ramping up and the pressures coming in.
Right.
I ask guys all the time, who is your friend that knows everything about you that you could call at 2 a.m. and would be there for you? And most guys that are late 30s and beyond say, I can't think of anybody.
Wow.
So it's a real problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of it being a real problem, our Surgeon General of America, Vivek Murthy, he actually addressed isolation. He says that it is a larger health epidemic than heart disease and diabetes. That's huge.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a study by Brigham University where they discovered that men or anyone who lives alone, who live in isolation, who don't have that camaraderie, that community, that family that live with them, their mortality rate increases by 26 to 35%. That's huge. So it's amazing that you just took a moment and God revealed, like, hey, look around.
Right.
You're lonely, but you're not the only one who's lonely.
Right.
And that's how this ministry started.
Right.
That's amazing.
There's so much that we could talk about, but I just want to just make a broad stroke about family. Because in today's world, what I see is more and more young people moving to an urban environment, seeking community because the family has broken down to the point that they're not getting that God-ordained community experience. And so going into a urban environment, you're surrounded by people, you can hang out at the coffee shop, you can whatever, and you have this simulation of this experience, but yet I'm in control of how close I let people.
Right. So
family is messy.
Yeah. That's a really good point. It's almost like you're in this urban environment. It's like being in a room full of people, but still being alone.
Yeah. They're wanting something.
But they're wanting something.
I guess that's my point.
So for everyone who's watching and listening, I think we should first raise how big of an issue isolation is. Why is this a problem? What are some of the spiritual impacts that loneliness and isolation have, especially for a male?
To me, the biggest situation that I am being confronted with over and over within guys within the church and those in the periphery of the church is in the area of sex addiction and pornography, which really is going to blow up in isolation. And it drives a person more and more and more into isolation. So that is probably one of the biggest negative outcomes, but pretty much all addictions
All addictions
are going to, that's what they're showing. Back in the day, I remember hearing when I was a young man that, you give these rats maybe some
cocaine.
Something that could really kill addicting. Some opiate,
Yeah.
and heroin, and they'll self-medicate and kill themselves.
Wow.
But they've done the experiment in more recent times, putting these rats in big environments where they have play toys, they've got a lot of variety of food, they've got others that they can mate with, they can raise their litters, and just the whole normal thing, the social environment, and they don't kill themselves.
Interesting.
So, so much there about addiction, but I know that one thing that's happening in the United States is legalizing some of these addictive substances, which I know a lot of people are. I mean, there's not a good side of it, except that we're trying to maybe normalize some of this isolation.
Right. But isolation isn't normal. In fact, God tells us it's not good for man to be alone.
Exactly.
Take that with a spouse or with community, right?
Exactly.
So what do you think feeds into this isolation? I know when we've spoken off camera about this a little bit, I've thrown out the idea that it's the American culture. And you're like, it's beyond the American culture. This is a worldwide epidemic.
Yeah.
What feeds into that isolation? What are some, is it shame? Is it insecurity? Or what is it about men today that we're seeming to be the most isolated generation of men ever?
Well, I think number one, we can be isolated more than ever. I think that's important to understand. But then to also realize it goes back to the fall. When Adam and Eve ate that fruit and then they realized their nakedness, that's the first time we hear of shame. Wow. They were ashamed. So they went into hiding, tried to cover themselves. And of course, God calls them. He's always calling us out of isolation. He's always calling us back.
Yeah.
The enemy is the one. Whenever we go into isolation, we are hearing the voice of the enemy. And so that drives us that direction. So, but back to the American situation, we've kind of got the perfect storm in the Western world driving people into isolation.
Interesting.
And that is, we got to go back hundreds of years.
Okay, a little history lesson. Here we go.
I taught a course, it was called Wilderness Interpretation. And one of the books I used took a historical look at wilderness in how America actually came about. And without wilderness and without space and elbow room, we couldn't have this fierce independent, because in Europe, everything was oppressive. All of the monarchies, all of the religious systems was controlling, and these people were willing to die to have this freedom. And once they got to America and they had all of this space, they could say, I want to live this way. I want to have religious freedom. I want to be able to say what I want to say.
They're basically in their plot of land. They're their own king in their own right.
Exactly.
Right? So that's new as well, right?
Exactly. And so that tapped into God's design that we should have freedom.
Okay.
But this is something that I didn't say beforehand, but this is really interesting. There's a really famous rock climber back in the day, and rock climbers are independent spirits, right?
Okay.
They're very much that way. But he made a correlation that I think is powerful. He said this: the greater the density of the human population, the greater the number of laws and rules.
Okay.
So when you have urban centers, you've got all of these rules and laws to make sure we get along.
Right.
But if we have elbow room and we can go out in the backyard and do our target practicing with
shoot some cans and
whatever, nobody cares, right?
Right.
But anyway, this whole idea that our American culture has been based around this independence. In fact, it's called
the Declaration of Independence. I see where you're going with this. Okay.
Declaration of Independence. So the idea of being independent,
it's like the spirit of America.
Yeah, it's interesting how God created us to be independent, but within community. That makes sense.
Yeah.
We have our own free will,
right,
and freedom within our decision making and our ideas, but we need to depend on each other in community. So it's that dichotomy.
It's deep rooted in America.
Yeah,
so, and this epidemic is really fascinating. Other cultures outside of the American culture of capitalism and provide for your family and go home, eat dinner, but get ready for the next day because you got to go back and provide for your family. And then, so it's just like this cycle. But in other cultures, it almost seems like they take time to have that community time.
Right.
I look at Hispanic cultures, I look at most African cultures, look at the Middle East, you look at these cultures where it's not uncommon to see two men locking arms, walking down the street, talking about their family and their kids, or two men at a cafe shop sipping tea, talking about their daughters. I mean, and in America, that's like, it's just unheard of, right? I mean, you've got to get to work. And you're saying that this isolation that we're experiencing here in America, one, it's easier to be isolated here in America.
Probably.
And two, it's just the American spirit, independence, have that independence. But maybe we've taken it a little too far.
Yeah.
And this isolation that we found ourselves in of not having that camaraderie or friendship, being in our mid-30s with families and finding out, wait a second, I don't have a best friend right now. You're saying that type of isolation is just it is a bedrock for addictions.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're struggling with all these addictions yourself. You don't have that community, that camaraderie. How have you combated that isolation? What is your ministry, this blueprintformen.org? You've seen this kind of isolation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How have you combated it?
Well, small groups. I mean, that's really where things are. If you were to look at the logo for my ministry, it's a compass with a cross in the middle.
Okay.
And to me, a compass, what is it for? It's to make a circle. And circles are what really the gospel is all about. It's connecting people in community. The early church, what is it about? You know, they met together, they broke bread around table, and they fellowshipped. Of course, they got into God's word and stuff, but at the same time, it's about this connectivity in circles. Yeah. So with guys that are in isolation, most of the time, they don't realize their deficit and their problem till they've really hit a wall, rock bottom or something, and they're going, you know, I need some help. My marriage is pretty much toast, or my addiction has landed me in jail. That unfortunately is the common thread that I see over and over. But if you can get guys in community earlier on, that's better. But let me speak to one other thing, because back to the education. I believe that is the foundational bedrock mistake that's going on, is there's no emphasis early on. So guys want to be in control, they want to be powerful, they don't want to fail, but yet they haven't been equipped to succeed.
What do you mean elaborate? So you're like, as in, is this back to the idea that manhood isn't taught anymore?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Yeah. For example, you know, like I mentioned, you know, you go through all this education to have a job and do something, but yet the eternal, you know, fleshing out your leadership as a man in the home, in the church, in the community, unless you've just had an unusual circumstance where your father and other men in your environment really modeled it in such a way that you got it. Most guys are not.
Leadership's not taught.
They're not catching it or being, you know, it's not caught or taught. Used to be, it was mostly just caught.
Right.
And now it's not being caught, and it's definitely not being taught.
Wow.
So we need to ramp up the teaching, because how are you going to catch it? I mean, it's like we're in a backwards mode right now.
Yeah. So then, on this teaching note, what are some core fundamentals that could be taught that would cause one's ability to step into manhood to flourish and be successful?
Well, back to the small group. The small groups that I run, I usually have one, like I had one this morning, 6 a.m. Got another one tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Pretty much morning is the time slot that I find with a lot of guys that are in their 30s, particularly a lot of former students, actually.
Wow. Yeah.
And so that time slot is where guys can come together. We usually use some kind of a curriculum, because guys want content. They need content. Right. But we need to also have the fellowship. So what I find is that most small groups are going to need, there's going to be a sacrifice somewhere to carve out that time. It might be your sleep. I mean, 6 a.m, you've had to get up pretty early to get ready to go to work, to meet with a group, and then go on to work.
Exactly.
And so there has to be a motivation to do that. So hour and a half, I would say, is about where I say is the sweet spot. So you got to dedicate weekly. This is not once a month, weekly, a week, an hour and a half. And you go through a curriculum. Now, some of the curriculum's listed on my website. If you go to resources.
So we're talking how to build a small group now. We're saying the way to combat isolation, small group community. Doesn't have to be over churchy, over,
No.
The word small group can be just community.
And what I find, unfortunately, with most guys, this is what I've seen a lot of times, small group is, okay, we read a book, we come together and discuss it. Half the guys don't read the book. And so they're just kind of showing up, feeling a little bit more shame added to shame box versus, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just realized that, okay, there's DVD-based curriculum out there that's super good.
Okay.
And what we do is just a plug and play 30-minute DVD, maybe 15 minutes. And then we talk about it, and we do maybe during the week, there might be a scripture we memorize.
Yeah.
There might be some journaling that we do that we share when we come back together.
Nice.
But there's also accountability in areas that we need accountability. Maybe some guy's wanting to lose some weight.
Right.
So, the next week he's going to be coming back talking about how that's going.
Yeah.
Maybe it's another guy that's got an addiction to porn. This is a really common one.
Yeah.
So he's going to be coming back talking about how that's going. So the accountability in a brotherhood is really important.
Brotherhood. That's a big one.
Brotherhood.
Now, you mentioned the word, I just want to come back to, you mentioned the word shame multiple times already. We see shame back in the Garden of Eden. We see shame that sounds like it's becoming a barrier between men. That shame, or even that comes with sexual sins, where we tend to retract and go back in isolation because we feel too much shame. It sounds like shame also contributes to isolation, whether it be self-isolation or, I guess that's really the biggest one. Now, I do want to talk about that a little bit. Is it possible that there are some men who don't connect with other men out of shame? Maybe it's a fear of being inadequate, or the shame of rejection, or the shame of being perceived as being homosexual, or it's like there's I feel like there's barriers that keep, especially in America, men from connecting with other men.
Right.
And you're saying, well, you got to overcome that, and the best way to combat isolation is a small group, community, camaraderie. You get a light bulb just hit. What is it?
Well, see, that's why you got to dress it up different. You don't say, hey, Greg, I want you to come to a small group. I mean, most guys are going to go, I don't know.
Not me.
Yeah. I mean, that was me, a small group, 20 years ago. I'd have said, I don't need that, But what you have to do is dress it up different. In other words, a lot of the stuff that I do is not small group on the outside. Okay. It's an event to draw people in out of interest.
What are some examples of
that? Well, some of the things that we've done, which is kind of crazy, I've got some former students that are in special forces, okay? So we've done weekend events where it's based around special forces training. I mean, we're talking about over-the-top stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, every weapon you can think about, and tactics and trainings, and
I'm coming to your small group, man.
I mean, we're doing maneuvers at 2 a.m.
That's awesome.
And taking down a POW camp, and
I imagine that just like grows this brotherhood, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
and within it, you see, there's like 6 guys that are working together to accomplish a goal. So those are the kind of things that it's like planted within the activity as a small group, but you have a mission. Another thing that I really enjoy doing, especially during the summer months when people kind of go all different directions, is I do a lot of outdoor type stuff. My background was in outdoor leadership at Southern in the outdoor program. So we go out to Wyoming, to the Wind River Range, and go into the backcountry for a week, climb a peak, go out to Washington and climb Mount Rainier.
Wow.
And all of this involves teamwork, leader of the day. We're looking out for each other, for safety, and when you share your story around a campfire, it's like, okay,
that's awesome.
This is what happened. And as a leader, you lead out with your story, and then everybody feels safe.
Now, I remember you had mentioned in passing one time that you had done this with a group of pastors once. And one of the pastors came up to you and he's like, what was that? What was the interaction like? He was blown away. Like, I've never had this kind of experience with just not having to lead out in ministry, but having community and camaraderie. I mean, you could probably retell that story a little better than I could, but basically as a pastor, had been in pastoral ministry for many years.
Decades.
That had never had an opportunity to just connect with other men.
Exactly.
I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk a little about leadership, and especially spiritual leadership. I feel like many men who are in these leadership positions, especially spiritual leadership, clergy, pastors, bishops, whatever you want to call them, it's like they live in a glass house where they have to be perfect. I would imagine that in itself is a bit isolating.
In fact, I would say that the more conservative the church that you belong to, the greater the effect of shame. Because you've got to almost keep people away from you because you're imperfections, you know your issues, you know where your failures are, but you can't let anybody know because it's not safe.
Interesting.
And so when you actually can get a guy to go into an experience where I was loved and accepted even with my junk, it's a refreshing thing. In fact, most guys have never experienced that, but it's got to be safe.
Right.
It's got to be safe.
And so a lot of times in these spiritual environments, you have to put on this facade, this face that you're perfect, which is just driving you further in isolation,
right?
Which is just driving you further into your addictions, which is just this is a huge issue.
It is.
So let's just get like step by step, uber practical here.
Okay.
You've mentioned small groups as one very practical way to combat isolation. Are there any other ones? And if not, how do we start a small group?
Well, I mean, when I say small group, you got to understand that that's got to live outside of that. In other words, you can't have behavior modification as the end game. It's got to be transformation. That's the source of all. Okay. So to do that, it takes more than a small group.
Okay.
So you've got this commitment of time with a band of brothers, but then every morning, every one of us, it doesn't matter what our age, we have to spend time alone with God. Most of us have never been taught how to do that.
Wow.
I mean, we might have gone to church, we might have gone to even a religious institution, but it's mostly about the head stuff up here. So we've got to bring it down into the heart by spending time alone with God every morning and by reading His Word, journaling, memorizing Scripture, but then sharing what you've learned with that small group, the victories, the failures, and all those things. So it's not just the small group. If you don't have your own quiet time with God, this is going to be inadequate. This is always the source.
So then how do we start that source? Or the source is that one-on-one time with God, but how do we start that small group? Let's say, here I am with my studio brothers here, looking at the Little Light team, and we're like, hey, dude, we're all isolated. We're all lonely. We come to work, we're friends, but outside of work, what do we do? How do I get started with that? How could someone start a small group, and what are some good resources they could use to do it?
Well, here's a practical example. I've got some former students that they build tiny houses, okay? And they've got a real core of young guys that are all probably late 20s up through their mid 30s, okay? Very bright, talented guys, really great guys. I love them. But there was still this educational deficit, They're starting families and all this stuff, and so the need becomes elevated. That's
how do
key.
I do this?
But then they just said, because I'd talked to them a lot, and their dad had too. So the idea was, hey, let's show up to work an hour early, one day a week. So they chose Tuesday morning.
Okay.
So this morning they met.
Okay.
An hour early. They watched a video. They talk about life. They pray together. Super simple. Now the video is content related to manhood. So it just grows, and it's the steady thing. It's not like, oh, we're going to read this book and we're good to go. No.
Right. So you're saying, in short, just do something. Whether you get together to build houses, whether you start wrenching on a car project together, just start doing something with your fellow brothers to just start get that community, the camaraderie going. Now, what's that resource that they used this morning, that group you mentioned? What is that resource, or can you plug a resource for us to kind of look into?
Yeah, I mean, like, again, if you just go to my website, a lot of the resources are there. But some of the stuff that I found most effective is very direct at just teaching manhood. So some of the stuff that Robert Lewis has put together, he's from Little Rock, Arkansas. He's been around. He's kind of the godfather of men's ministry, really. And we go through Quest for Authentic Manhood, Winning at Work and at Home, and then also The Great Adventure. There's 3 different volumes, and it's all DVD. It's super simple. Those things, you go through it at 60 weeks of just content. And it goes through everything we're just touching the surface on. It's powerful.
That's awesome.
It changed my life. Once I went through that stuff, I said, where have I been? Where has this information been? It's not being presented in my circle. And so that's why I just said, somebody's got to get this out here, that we as men are failing partly because we don't have that heart transformation, but sometimes you have to come through the back door with knowledge, and then you realize your deficit and you go,
right.
Man.
Not only is it the heart transformation, but we actually don't have the know-how either. No one taught us to be fathers. No one taught us to be leaders. No one taught us to. That's powerful. Marty, we could talk all day. Man. Yeah. This is awesome. I just want to do some things in summary here. So it sounds like, it's recognized on a spiritual level in churches, on a leadership level in corporations, and even on a health level from our Surgeon General. Isolation is a huge issue, especially amongst men in the West. Yeah. And we're talking about how being isolated feeds into addictions. It feeds into feelings of inadequacy. It feeds into shame, and shame back into isolation. It's like this cycle. Some ways to break free of that. You're saying be intentional about reaching out to your brothers. Yep. Get a group of friends together. Just do something with them. Start building that brotherhood. And there are resources and ideas on your website, blueprintformen.org, on how to pull together small groups and some resources to use. Man, there are so many other questions I'd love to ask, and I'm sure you guys would love to ask as well. So I'm going to ask that you guys drop them in the comment section below, and we will definitely get to them. If you have any questions or comments you want to make towards Marty or towards this topic, drop them there as well. Check out the website and the link, blueprintformen.org. And guys, it's been a blessing. This is Small Talk, where we discuss how faith fits in the big picture. Looking forward to hearing from you. God bless. We'll see you next time.